Hey all, so this is kind of my vlog review of Avengers Endgame. And let me just say, first off, this is a long movie. And I know that's kind of going without saying for anyone who has seen the runtime, but it's a bit of a shocker for folks who maybe are used to the normal runtimes of certain films. Like, I don't know, some of the more solo adventure films. Those usually will run about an hour and a half, 2 hours at most. This film runs 3 hours long. And you might ask, well, I know Bollywood people, big fans of Bollywood, uh, they see 3 or 4 hour movies all the time because those films have a lot of long musical numbers, a lot of intriguing plots. They immerse you into this whole world usually, and they just go for it. In India, a movie is your entire afternoon. It's a whole experience, much akin to opera back in the 19th century or the early part of the 20th century. But in this case, this one definitely plays out a lot like a really long opera. You have a lot of the twists and turns and emotional impacts that relate directly to um, a, um, a good long operatic piece, and you have that sense of scale and epicness. Now, I'm not going to try and do a lot of spoilers at the start of this because I want you to be able to kind of settle in and maybe have a chance to see it. So if you are absolutely certain you do not want to hear any spoilers about the movie, then you can just turn off the video now. It's one of those rare instances where a YouTube reviewer or an online reviewer will flat out say, don't listen to this if you don't want the film spoiled for you at all. But there are so many twists and turns with this movie that you would basically need to sit down for the entirety of the 3 hours, regularly pausing the film just to get all of the little twists and turns down. This sucker was written with a 3 act structure in mind and opens and closes in a very different way than you would expect. Like if you've seen the first Avengers movie or Age of Ultron or even Infinity War, this one opens and closes in a very different way from every other Avengers movie that you've seen. In a lot of ways, it opens more reminiscent of the Iron Man movies, if you think about it, because a lot of those have a very soft opening where you're not right immersed into whatever it is. So this one had me kind of wondering, well, what the heck is going on with some of the little things at the end. But let's first get into how our story begins. So, for those who don't quite understand what happened at the beginning, we watch Hawkeye teaching his daughter how to shoot arrows and how to, pick the target and concentrate. And so he's kind of bringing her up to be his protege. And this actually bears out, as I recall, from the comics, because I believe Hawkeye's daughter does eventually kind of take over the mantle and become his heir apparent with the Avengers. But moving on from that, we basically see the moment where Barton loses his family. And we always kind of wondered, well, where the heck is he during Infinity War? Well, the fact is that he was always looking to retire. He had done a lot of missions, and he was always the one member of the Avengers who had a family and didn't have like superpowers or anything like that. He made a very big point with a lot of his appearances in the first film and Age of Ultron that he has a bow and arrow. He has, what basically account for ranged melee weapons or melee weapons for hand to hand, as it were, but never something like a hammer that can call thunder, or blaster rays and a suit of very, tough armor or whatever. So his character was always kind of the most vulnerable. So they open up with that, showing that he and his family are having a cookout, they're having a picnic, just out there on the farm. They're relaxing. His guard is completely down. He does not know what has happened. And he turns around. His daughter's gone. His wife is gone. All of his kids are gone. And he is alone on that farm. So Thanos didn't just take like one or two members of his family. He took his entire family. So this leads Barton on this whole sort of lone wolf crusade to essentially take out everyone who really deserved death. People like drug cartels and gangsters all around the world. He just decides, screw it, I'm going to go and, fulfill this mission that if I didn't have a family, I would have done, and I'm going to do it in their name, because these guys are out there killing everyone, and we just lost half the population of the earth. We can't sit around, committing to this nonsense. He really is, committing to this thing. And even though he's killing, it is for, the greater good as he sees it. So he's taking out Mexican drug cartels that operate on the border, and he's taking out Yakuza in Japan, and that's where we meet him when Black Widow eventually catches up with him, and he is looking ragged. Like he's been sleepless and just been driven on this quest. And we sort of see what Barton would have looked like if he hadn't, been with S.H.I.E.L.D., or if S.H.I.E.L.D. had basically not given him the chance to have a family and a home and had taken the reins off. So it's really hard to see him like that. But beyond all of that, we have a very brief scene with Captain Marvel at the beginning at the Avengers compound. And basically the entire point is that we need to regather those who survived from Thanos. And this is taking place only a couple of days after the final moments of Infinity War. Right? So we see that Captain Marvel goes out into space and rescues Nebula and Tony Stark, because they're sitting there in the Milano and are totally without fuel. They're just drifting. They're not going to be able to make it back to Earth within Tony's lifetime. Nebula will be able to make it back because she's a cyborg, so she'll outlive him. She doesn't need food. She doesn't need sleep or anything like that, because she is so much machine that she doesn't really need she doesn't need food in order to sustain herself. The flesh that lives on her is just a remnant. So Captain Marvel rescues them, and then what is it? They go. They try and talk Tony into helping them after Ant-Man is randomly rescued from the quantum realm by a rat in a used store where all of the van equipment and everything got taken. I don't know why it got put in a used store. I would just assume that it was kind of a city lost and found or something like that. That maybe the San Francisco, municipality just assumed everyone disappeared. So this is just some more stuff that was lost when half the population of the world disappeared. So maybe there were allowances for unclaimed property, and they just got put into these storage facilities until people claimed them. Anyway, so Scott is ejected from quantum space back into our world, our dimension, but everyone has assumed he's dead, and he can't find anyone. Hope and Hank are both gone, so there's no way to know what exactly happened. He eventually finds a memorial where it turns out all the names of the local dead, all the people who disappeared into ashes, were just, they had their names put up so that they could be remembered, and his name is right there. He's worried, are Hank and Hope there? Is Cassie there? And he finds his name. So he goes and he looks and he manages to find Cassie. But by this time, it has been 5 years. So basically what happened prior to that was 2 days after the events of Infinity War. Captain Marvel rescued Iron Man and Nebula from deep space and brought them back to Earth after he had been, kind of starving and everything. Well, from there, they developed a plan to find Thanos, and Nebula knew exactly where he would be. And Thor and all of the other survivors came after him in the Milano, went into space, found him, and he was like, you can't have the gauntlet because I atomized the Infinity Stones, so they are gone forever. Well, at that point, Thor just loses it and kills Thanos. Takes the axe, and Thanos is done. So, shocker, right? Well, it carries on from there to the 5-year point later where Captain America is kind of helping a lot of victims who are still in recovery. The Statue of Liberty is surrounded by boats, but they don't give any explanation as to why. They've got some kind of shanty town set up outside of I think it's the Mets Stadium, and that's like, okay, why? I understand that you would need like some kind of FEMA center or something, but why is this that way? It didn't quite make sense that these things would be set up that way unless people who were living out in the community just kind of were taken to New York to resettle in some way. But I don't understand why there are so many boats around Liberty Island. They don't really explain that. Anyway, so everyone's still kind of distraught when Ant-Man shows up at the Avengers compound and he says, hey, guess what? I've been to the quantum realm, and while for you guys it's been 5 years, for me it was only 5 hours. So he says, this quantum realm, this will help us fix things and set things right. And if you don't know by now, this involves makes the entire plot for a lot of it into, as they call it, a time heist. And they're kind of worried about causality because of the movies that have been made about all of this, like Back to the Future, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and basically every time travel movie. Causality has always been an important part of every plot. If you screw things up in the past, then things won't be right in the future. So, it always kind of makes things a bit of a hiccup. But as it is, I kind of hated how they brushed it off, because it's literally just Bruce Banner, who we see has not figured out time travel as well as Tony Stark, who's applying himself to it. And Bruce Banner, by the way, has basically become a blend of himself and Hulk. He's able to stay in Hulk form, but it's Bruce's mind who is in charge rather than the Rage. So they've kind of come into a balance, which is good. It moves the plot along quickly enough where you don't have to worry as much about Hulk coming in and smashing everything. So one thing I do like is that Iron Man eventually figures out that there is a way to make time travel work, but you have to accelerate the Pym particle around basically an atom smasher, basically a particle accelerator, but the particle accelerator has to be shaped like a Mobius strip, which doesn't quite make sense when you think about it, because a circle would work just as well. You want something that doesn't have a beginning or an end. Well, the circle would do that too. The Mobius strip is just something with two sides that are a circle. So it didn't quite make sense to me. Like if you had a cylindrical ring, that where the confines of it were a ring, basically just like at the very large particle accelerator, the Hadron Collider in Switzerland, it wouldn't be any different. But it's a plot device. It gets you to where you need to be, to where they're going to travel back in time. Well, I liked the fact that when they did this part of it, they didn't have everything go easily. In fact, they specifically had, when they needed to retrieve the stones after the events of the first Avengers movie, they had that not go smoothly. Specifically because all of these characters are running around and they're on guard, so you can't just walk in and take the Tesseract, and you can't just walk in and take the Scepter. So there ended up being an interesting aspect to it there, and they have a really interesting fight scene that, again, I'm not going to spoil it for you. I want you to enjoy it. And they have a lot of interesting comedic scenes that take place throughout that portion, that leg of the mission. And they have all these different facets. At one point, Nebula and War Machine go back to when Star-Lord is going to retrieve the first Infinity Stone in Guardians of the Galaxy 1. That's an interesting aspect. That's an interesting scene. I liked that they went ahead and did that. And then they pointed out that outside of him and his headphones, nobody can hear that music. So that scene is literally just him walking along, singing and dancing with nobody else hearing the music. So even though that opening is really great and that movie's really enjoyable as a result of that really awesome opening, it's amusing that they're kind of able to put a little bit of a pin in it and go, yeah, if you want to go see that opening again, go see Guardians of the Galaxy, but don't expect it here. We're not going to rehash everything. So I really enjoyed that part. Rocket, in the meantime, goes back in time with Thor to help recover the stone of what is it? I think it's the Stone of Life or something. Anyway, it's the Red Stone, and it turns out that was part of Thor: The Dark World. And I just watched Thor: The Dark World, and I didn't remember that part. I mean, isn't that wild? You can actually watch these movies, and you'll totally miss that is part of this larger Infinity Stone series. So I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch it, or I think I stopped watching it at a certain point because it stopped being fun. I'd had a rough day, so I was trying to watch something a bit more lighthearted and fun. But they brought back all the actors. They got Natalie Portman back to play her character, which is really cool. So you really do get caught back up with everything. And the missions don't go smoothly. Hawkeye and Black Widow end up going after the Soul Stone and having to face the same challenge that Thanos and Gamora faced. I mean, what follows is this epic battle between these two best friends who love each other deeply and have to decide, which of them is going to die in order to get the stone. Now, that's not spoiling it too much for you, because which one ends up going is really upsetting, and I'm going to try and avoid revealing that through the rest of this review. So, from there, they end up getting all the stones back, and they end up creating a gauntlet with basically Iron Man armor in order to make it, something that can adapt to whichever person wants to wear it. At first, Thor is like, look, I'm an Asgardian, I'm a god, I'm the one who can do this. I have the power of lightning running through me. It's something that won't do me any damage. And Hulk ends up being the one to say, you know what, most of the radiation coming out of this thing is gamma, so it's as if I was born for this. So you guys can quibble about this, but in the end, it's got to be me. And the fact is, of the lot, Hulk is kind of the one with the least to lose, because he is the strongest Avenger. He is stronger than Thor. We've tested and proven this on multiple occasions. And it's something where Bruce didn't want to have it tested, as it were, where if he lost control and turned into the Hulk, how would he be at lifting Thor's hammer, for example. But it ends up being him, and he does get pretty badly damaged by the gauntlet. But in all of this time hopping, Nebula ended up being the Achilles heel to the plan, because when she travels back in time, she ends up getting mixed up in the situation when her other self gets sort of a message from her system by mistake, and ends up getting word of their plan, and it all gets revealed to Thanos right there in front of her. So the Thanos of Guardians of the Galaxy is brought into things, and this is I'm trying to remember exactly, because for some reason the Chitauri are there when he comes to Earth, just as Hulk snaps his fingers to bring back everyone who Thanos wiped out. But Nebula has traveled back to the future, if you'll pardon my usage of that phrase, in lieu of her future self, because she can do a lot of the stuff. So this is a really interesting plot twist. It's a good switcheroo. And just as they're checking to see if everyone's back, and Ant-Man is like, hey, I think it worked, Thanos from the Guardians in the Galaxy time period attacks. And you end up with him bringing all of his forces, including the Chitauri, which is like, I thought they were already defeated by the time we got to Guardians of the Galaxy, but I guess I don't know. I guess he was able to bring them with him because there were more of them or something. I don't know exactly. But the other half of it is it's really cool. It is possibly the coolest scene in the entire film, um, because the because the Hulk's snapping of his fingers worked, and everyone was brought back, and Doctor Strange knew to do everything, and uh, Hulk met with the Sorcerer Supreme before Doctor Strange even happened, so she knew that everything was going to happen and was able to place orders with the other sorcerers. They were able to use their sling rings to bring everyone from the other parts of the galaxy to that to the Avengers compound to save the day. So you have all of these sling ring portals opening up as all of these wizards bring the Wakandans and the Asgardians and the Guardians of the Galaxy are all back. And just all these forces end up coming forward. Iron Maiden, Pepper Potts as Iron Maiden comes forward, and the Wasp, and everyone just comes forward for this big, epic final battle that is the most amazing thing that I have ever seen. And they are all just ready and there, and Captain America is coordinating everything. So he's, fighting, but he's also coordinating all the efforts. And it is just so fantastic. It is the most worthwhile part of the entire film. Spider-Man is back, right? We knew he was going to come back, but we weren't sure what was going to happen. And he ends up playing a really awesome part in everything. And it looks like they're about to defeat Thanos, because Thanos is up against, the wall or whatever, and he's being defeated by Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor. This is just an amazing scene, and I'm not spoiling it for you by telling you this happens. And he's like, use the ship and fire down, and so he's like, but our troops, I'll do it. And so his second in command has the ship, has Thanos' ship fire down on everyone, just so that they can thin down the numbers. And that immediately brings the battle to a grinding halt, as pretty much all or most of Thanos' forces are defeated at that point. Very few are left, but most of our heroes are okay. So they're trying to get the gauntlet to Ant-Man and the Wasp, who have their time tunnel from the back of the van from the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp. And Spider-Man is swinging along. He has instant kill on his suit activated so that he can do everything he can. And he is trying his best, along with everyone else, to do everything. But it is going crazy. Well, we haven't had Captain Marvel in this entire film, after having her built up as being the one person who was strong enough to defeat Thanos. Well, she finally ends up showing up and destroying Thanos' ship and turning the tide. She's like, oh, well, I've been occupied elsewhere in the rest of the universe because, Earth isn't the only place where stuff is happening. Well, I'd really love to hear about that in maybe Captain Marvel 2 or something like that. But unfortunately, you don't find out what else she got up to. You just find out that she got a haircut. So she's got more of a what's the term? Kind of a pixie cut. Yeah, anyway. Well, she ends up turning the tide, but Thanos throws his big old double sword right at the van and destroys the time tunnel, so they can't send the gauntlet where Thanos will never get it. I don't know, to the end of the universe or something like that. Well, what ends up happening is Tony Stark sacrifices himself. And he does this in a really clever way. Um, for some reason, somehow, I don't know how he's able to do this, but Doctor Strange is able to show him that there's one chance that they have at that moment to, get um, to save the day. And I don't know how that communicates things, but he just holds up one finger, and then Iron Man grapples with him, but uses his suit to remove the Infinity Stones to put them in his own gauntlet. And in so doing, he's absorbing all this energy and won't be able to save the day. But yeah, I just had an interesting um, thought towards the end, but I'll get to that in a minute. So Thanos is about to snap his fingers and says, "I am inevitable," which he said earlier in the film. And then when he snaps his fingers, nothing happens. And he looks over at Tony, who, has all the Infinity Stones, and he's like, this is really, a lot for him. But at this point, he's traveled back in time. He met his dad at one point. So it's a really epic kind of movie at that point. And he just, before he snaps his fingers, says, "Yeah, well, I am Iron Man." And it's kind of a good send-off. It's a good way for him to leave us, because Tony Stark was the first hero to get his movie. Prior to that, there weren't any others. In terms of Marvel movies, they made Captain America just about a year or two after. And it was a good one, obviously. But, it's always been building up to this, and Robert Downey Jr. was one of the oldest actors in the cast, so it was always a struggle as to how much longer he could play Iron Man. Well, after that happens, when he snaps his fingers, all of Thanos' forces turn to ash, and unfortunately, it seems like that includes Gamora. But I'm not sure. Because as it is, later on, the Guardians of the Galaxy, it seems like they're going to be looking for Gamora. Like maybe they're going to find her somewhere. Nebula is still there with them. So something happened, and they're going to see if they can find her. Because if the Thanos of the past was wiped out from the period in Guardians of the Galaxy, then it's entirely possible that Gamora is still alive in the new timeline. And the Sorcerer Supreme pointed out that, if you do this with the Infinity Stones, it's entirely possible that you will send our timeline into a new direction that will have very drastic changes. So it's not certain. Nothing is certain at this point. So we lost Iron Man. Then we get a scene where Thor is handing things over to Valkyrie, where she is going to be the new leader of the Asgardians. And he's handing over the kingdom, the title, everything. And he is going to go off with the Guardians of the Galaxy. And he has both his hammer and his axe now. So presumably, because he really likes the axe, he might have left her the hammer. Just because, Oh, there is a really cool scene involving the hammer, which he has gotten back by this time. He's got both his axe and his hammer. I won't spoil it for you, though, but it is really awesome. And it's part of the big final battle. So you're just going to have to enjoy that part as a surprise. Let's see. What else happens? Captain America decides that he's the one who's got to be the one to go back and put the Infinity Stones back. By this time, he has plenty of the Pym particle. He'll go back to all the different times that they removed the stones from, and put them back. Well, the time comes, because it's time travel, that he can just pop right back a few seconds after he left. And don't you know, he doesn't come back. And there's a very simple and clear reason why, and I'm not going to ruin it for you. But it turns out that they look over, and he's there as an old man sitting on a bench looking out at the lake. And they tell you why he doesn't come back, but you'll have to find out for yourself, because I'm not spoiling that part. I am not trying to make it all spoilers here. I'm not trying to completely ruin the film. Now, there is an important aspect, because they have Tony Stark's funeral on the lake where he and Pepper Potts have been raising their daughter Morgan. Well, there's a pan over where you have all of these different people that have been part of the Marvel Universe up till now. You have the Wakandans, you have Spider-Man and Aunt May, you have everyone from the entire Marvel Universe standing there at Tony Stark's funeral. And you have, some of the different actors. Like you have Thunderbolt, General Thunderbolt, from, God, what is his name? From Captain America Civil War. Anyway, you've got him there in the back, but right in front of him is a young man with a big head of hair. And at first I had to think about it. I had to look. I'm like, who the heck is that kid? He's young, but at this point, since it's 5 years after the events of Infinity War, do you know who I figured it out to be? It's the kid from Kentucky from Iron Man 3. And, I had to think about this. I had to really apply myself to figure this stuff out. Captain America hands over the shield to Falcon and says, "You're going to be the new Captain America," which, yeah, okay. So you've got a new Captain America, a new Thor. So who's going to take over the mantle of Iron Man? Well, it can't be Pepper Potts, because she's raising her daughter. She's a single parent. She could probably show up for a thing or two, but is it going to be Morgan? No. She is, not even in kindergarten yet. She's still in preschool. So who the heck is it going to be? It's going to be the kid from Kentucky who's going to be the new Iron Man. And they showed him right there. So I thought that was a pretty cool little Easter egg that they're sticking in. This kid that we've never seen, that kid is going to be the new Iron Man. Other than that, they had, supposedly there's an end scene with Galactus, but I think that one is dubious, because I had heard, and I saw a clip on the web of Galactus there, and supposedly that's going to be the next villain that they're going to take on, and it would probably involve the Fantastic Four. But the question is, which incarnation of the Fantastic Four? It's got to be a new one, because I think it's 20th Century Fox did the Fantastic Four. I think it was Sony. Yeah, Sony did the most recent one, and they completely screwed it up. They made it an absolutely horrible incarnation. I'm actually kind of hopeful that it'll be the Roger Corman Fantastic Four from the 90s, because that was a good Fantastic Four. That's the best Fantastic Four movie that's ever been made out of 4 movies total. The best one never actually saw release, and you can watch it on YouTube for free, because it was this really cheaply made movie that was done for like $1 million, and I guess they promised the actors part of the gross to make up for the low budget. Anyway, But yeah, you can't do Galactus without kind of doing a Fantastic Four element to it, just because they've always been kind of involved in the Fantastic Four. But with all that aside, they really give this one a good salutation to say farewell to the old guard Marvel Cinematic Universe. Uh, they make a point, it's been 10 or 11 years now that they've been making these movies, and it's gone the distance. And they've brought in a new cast of actors to make these films. They've been bringing out Marvel movies now basically on a yearly basis, sometimes more than one per year. And they've been trying to make it all part of a shared cinematic universe so that there's overlap, there's previews, there's Easter eggs in every single one. And that takes a lot of effort on the part of the studio execs to back off and let the writers do what the writers want and have fun with it and make the movies fun and engaging. So after you get a film like Thor the Dark World, which goes all dark, and you get a film like the original Thor, which goes a little bit comedic and campy with this fish out of water story about a hero who's lost his powers and that kind of thing. You get this movie that, like Thor Ragnarok, that's actually fun, where you get kind of the same deal where Thor has lost his powers and he's dealing with a tough situation and he's got to kind of get back and save the day. In this instance, you have this really tragic ending with Avengers Infinity War leading into Avengers Endgame, and Avengers Endgame manages to tie up all the strings and leave a lot more open so that the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is going to be amazing, because they're probably going to go on a search for Gamora. They're probably going to have a new Iron Man in the kid from Kentucky. I forget his name. But he was left this really awesome lab, right? And he has spent the past several years doing a lot of research and being Tony Stark's kind of young protege. So, you know, maybe he's going to take over the mantle. I'm pretty sure that's where they're going to take it, because that would be a really interesting take on it. Having this regular kid from the middle of nowhere, raised by a single mom, abandoned by his dad. He always had a lot in common with Tony in the scenes that they shared in Iron Man 3. It would be a really interesting plot development. And in terms of Thor, it's great that they're, you know, having Valkyrie take over the role. That was kind of laid there in the first one, but having her brought back as this figure, as one of the last of the old guard from the old Asgard, having her take over the mantle, that's really cool. I appreciate it. I think that's going to be a really fun ride for everyone in the next Thor installment. It'll be interesting to see. And they'll probably have her, you know, working with someone like Doctor Strange on something. It'll be interesting to see the new Doctor Strange vehicle. I think that what they did here was try and satisfy the fans, make it a lot of fun, bring you on a complete journey round from everywhere that you've come, regardless of which superheroes were your absolute favorites and which ones you enjoyed watching their stories, even if you didn't necessarily identify with them as strongly. I have kind of a hard time identifying with Black Panther, only because he was born to this royalty and everything, and I have a hard time identifying with Thor kind of for the same reason. I have a hard time identifying with people who are born to these kinds of things. Even Tony Stark was kind of born to this mantle. I want to see a kid who never caught a break until basically he was kind to a stranger who ended up tapping him for destiny. I really want to see a lot of these things kind of develop along. I love Ant-Man. I think Ant-Man was easily one of my favorites, and I really would have loved to have seen the original treatment that they were going to do on the first film. But as it is, they've kind of taken it in a good direction and kept it going with good steam. So they've got a lot of good features coming up, and I'm actually excited about it. Even with this kind of being a signing off of the old guard and entering of the new guard, I'm really happy with it. I'm satisfied with it. I think it was a really good experience. Um, I'm not going to give it a full 5 out of 5 only because um, you're going from Infinity War with its really sad ending to Endgame with a satisfying ending and really good all around. But they're just it it takes you so long to get there. And there are some things I would have changed and some things that I think were left so blatantly unresolved that it ended up becoming sequel bait. And I feel like while they satisfied a lot of what I need, they did some things where they kind of left too many plot holes. Whenever you have time travel as a plot device, you're going to have plot holes as to how things turned out if this is what ended up happening in the past. Okay, but then how would this end up happening, and how would that end up happening? Even if you put the Infinity Stones right back where you were, you have a lot of unanswered questions like, what the heck happened? For example, when things go wrong getting the Tesseract, there is a big plot hole raised as to how exactly that's going to resolve things. And it just it raises a big fat question mark in my mind as to what exactly is going to happen. So I think that's probably going to come up in the next Thor sequel or possibly Guardians of the Galaxy. So it'll be interesting to see that. One other thing that disappointed me and was one of the reasons why why I'm not going to give this the full 5 out of 5 is they have an entire plot device where Thor has put on weight from drinking beer and not exercising and stuff. So they make light of him being fat as kind of a comedic device. They even have Rocket Raccoon say something that makes fun of him for his body. That was horrible. And that is one of the things that loses the full 5 out of 5. So you get a 4 out of 5 for Endgame. Kind of like I think I gave Infinity War a 3 out of 5 or a 3.5 because it was good, but it had such a sad ending, and it was going to be such an uphill climb to make any kind of good story out of Endgame. So they really needed to work on it, and I'm glad that they took the time that they did. But at the same time, I'm not as satisfied with some of the cheap shots that they ended up going to for levity, such as body humor around all of that. Specifically fat shaming, and it is fat shaming. So I didn't like that. It is in there. It's pretty prominent for basically all of the Thor plots. When he goes back in time, there's stuff about his body. And it's just not okay. I don't appreciate it. But that being said, do, by all means, go see it. Check it out. It gets a 4 out of 5 from me, and that's a pretty good score. That's easily in the plus. It's not a meh score at all. It is definitely worth it. It's good. It's satisfying. It's fun. You'll see a lot of fun things. You'll be grateful to have a lot of the plot threads kind of resolved where they are. And you'll be really glad that you stuck around through all 3 hours for the final battle. So you'll have a lot of fun. And you'll want to see more from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I'm sure. Anyway, with that being said, this video has run really long, so I'm thankful for you for you sticking around this whole time. And if you want to, click like, ding the bell, hit subscribe, and by all means donate to my Patreon campaign, Patreon/Clauda. Thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.